Welcome back to the smoke-filled room, this time actually in a smoke-filled room. We're pretty excited. As we talked about, once a month we're going in person to locations throughout the state of Illinois to talk about politics. Oftentimes we'll have a special guest from that area, which we have today. Today's recording is at A Cuban Experience in Waukegan. They've been incredible hosts. This place is awesome. We're going to have a event a little bit later today where we all get the chance to talk with each other and enjoy some cigars here. In the future, if you want to come out and see the recording of one of these and enjoy the experience with us, let us know. Today, we've got a special guest, Keith Brin, the Lake County Republican Chairman. Keith also was an elected official in Lake County. He served on a number of boards. He's an experienced attorney, has owned at least one business, if not multiple. He's worn a lot of hats. Keith, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have Keith with us here. We also have three members of our political team with us. We've got Matt DeRay, who covers Lake County for us, so I'm sure we'll get some thoughts from Matt about Lake County politics. We've got Abby Oliver, who covers DuPage in the western suburbs for us, Chris Jacoviak, who covers the south suburbs for us. Not with us today are John Gieske, who will be very proud that I said his name right. He's on vacation, I'm sure playing golf somewhere. And Michael Butler, who is, like 5 hours away, so we weren't going to make the poor guy have to drive all the way up here for this. But they are with us in spirit. We're going to talk about politics, but first we want to talk about Lake County. We've got Keith here. Kind of want to give a little bit of the history of Lake County and what has happened in this county, because the politics in this state have gone from in play to more blue, and Lake County has mirrored that, going from red to purple to blue. For those who don't follow Lake County politics, can you give a little bit of what has happened in this county over the last 20 years?
I think the impact of the presidential circus, however you look at it, has really impacted the suburbs, and it's worked against the Republican Party. Lake County is no different. Obviously being largely suburban outside of Chicago, we've been impacted by that. Now, many of the biggest counties in Illinois have sort of been hit the same way, and Lake County was purple. Certainly it used to be red, then became purple, and then over the last 6 years or so, it's gone pretty much blue, the way of a lot of the big suburbs.
I mean, and it's been a remarkable turnaround. I mean, in this county, Republicans held a majority on the county board for as long as anyone can remember, and we've lost that majority in the last, 4 years?
Actually, even worse, it was a super majority. And within about the last 6 years, we are now a super minority on the county board.
In terms of legislative seats, in terms of the districts, if you look at the maps, we have barely little pockets of the county at most. Most of those seats are based in other counties like McHenry, and then they have a little portion of Lake County. Congressional, we have no representation in the county at this point in Congress.
None.
It's been a significant and extreme turnaround. This is definitely a deep blue county now. But I think what we've seen in our politics in this county, and maybe Matt could weigh in on this as well, is at the local level, you see that a lot of people are voting for local elected officials who are fiscally conservative, who are good leaders. This isn't, if you look at the down low of the politics in this county, it isn't as deep blue progressive as people assume.
No, I think you're right about that. And look, at the end of the day, I think there's a common thread through most of America, and it certainly runs through the suburbs here, is that people want government, if they're going to be using tax dollars, they want the government to be using it properly. They don't want it to be throwing their money away. There's some affluence in Lake County, and regardless of your political stripe, you want the government to be using money appropriate way. And when you get down to very local levels, you're watching every dollar. When property taxes are skyrocketing, when the cost of everything is going up, it starts impacting your wallet. I don't care what political stripe you are, you're starting to look at the bottom line on everything.
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, we definitely saw this in the April election. I mean, take Grays Lake, which is a traditionally pretty Democrat area, but the candidates who made it across the finish line weren't traditional Democrats in the sense. They were just common sense, right-of-center candidates who believed in good government. And there wasn't the R or D next to the name, and people voted for the policy and the person and not the political party. And I think that we're seeing that that's what voters really care about. So if we want to win, and Republicans want to continue to win in this election cycle and in future cycles, we really need to get back to being for the people and what do the people want.
Yeah, well, we see that. I mean, we're here in Waukegan as we record this, and just 2 years ago, the Waukegan switched hands. It was led by a pretty progressive mayor and a more mainstream, if you will, fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative female took over just 2 years ago. Kind of shocked the political world that she won. It's a little self-serving to say that because we ran the race along with a friend of ours, Brad Goodman. So we're of course very proud of that win. But it's a blue community, yet they elected a fiscally conservative white female to lead the town. And you know what? She's been in office for 2 years. It's been 3 straight years of balanced budgets. She's cut the debt. She's restructured the government. She's got rid of patronage. I mean, in just 2 years, you see how good Republican governance, and she's not a Republican, but she's center right, so we'll claim her, is good conservative right of center leadership. You know, communities vote for that. They don't care about the R or D. They just want good leadership. And I know, talking to the owner of this place, he said, when you walk in this room, you're not Democrat or Republican. We're all just the brotherhood of the cigar. But then you start talking about different policies and different issues, and they are all mostly right of center. I mean, I think our brand struggles a little bit, which I know is something you're working on. But from the policy perspective and the leadership perspective, it's, you know, our right of center politics still play.
Oh, I mean, we've seen it. Look, you all after the last election did some amazing work that no one had really taken a deep dive into. You actually asked people what their philosophy was, regardless of why they voted. And it was pretty clear, and it's been clear to everybody, and the data has now been cited over and over again, and it really gives us hope, is that it's not even so much about policy, is that people live their lives by certain philosophy. And for the most part, people like government to set certain rules so that everyone plays fair, and then get out of their lives and stay out of the way. And that tends to be a center-right philosophy. When we get down deep into the weeds on some of these issues, really people, many of the time, just tune out entirely. And it gets people very annoyed, and it becomes a circus, and everyone starts yelling, and no one can tell who's right and who's wrong. But at the end of the day, they just want people at the governmental level to set the rules and get out of their lives. Let them live their lives. That is Republican core principles.
Yeah. Well, speaking of core principles, I know you're working in Lake County on a messaging project. I know at the state level, Leslie Munger and some others are working on messaging for the party. We've certainly recognized that our party needs to do a better job of messaging. And one of those things that we've talked about is getting less tied down by issues and more focusing on principles. That was Reagan's thing, right? It was the core principles. Issues may come and go. And we sometimes get too lost in issues. If you have your core principles about what it is to be a Republican or a conservative, then you don't get lost in a lot of those more controversial issues where we have to pick sides and fight. And you've done a great job of that in Lake County. I mean, I look at your board that you guys have put together, and you've got young people, you've got older people, you've got conservatives, you've got more moderates, males, females, minorities. I mean, you've got a really good representation of leadership in Lake County. That didn't just happen, right? That was a lot of work to bring people together.
Yeah, look. Boards, especially political boards, have often been dictated by the issues of the day. I decided to take a little bit of a different tact. As much as they're paying me for this job, and as much as I don't want to have free time in my life, I decided, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to do it the right way. And my management style is to try to not be not only the only voice in the room, but to try to be the dumbest voice in the room. I like the competition of ideas and philosophies, and let's work with the one that works and works best. If I want to be the only one in the room who's dictating policy, I don't need a board. I just look in a mirror, and that generally doesn't lead to good results, especially when Lake County is the third biggest county in Illinois. There are a lot of different voices in this county. We have the most conservative you'll find straight across the board, and we have very moderate side of the county that is socially very, very moderate, but fiscally pretty conservative. They're all Republicans. Yep. I don't even care if people are Democrats, but are just so sick of the way that Illinois is conducting itself. It's not hard to see how that can happen. Come on over, we'll have a discussion. I'm happy to say, look, you don't have to agree with everything I want. You don't have to agree with everything I think. Consider my candidates. Let the candidates speak to the issues. The party is about core philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, a Republican in Shields Township, which is where Danny Rogers is going to look different than a Republican in Grant Township with Marjorie Kubalanza. And a Republican in Antioch looks different than Barrington, and Grays Lake looks different than Waukegan. I mean, Lake County is one of the most diverse counties in the most diverse state in the country. And so looking at a county of 700,000 people, you recognize that not everyone thinks the same way.
Right. And look, there's different approaches to everything. But as to something you said, I think Republicans tend to eat their own when we start arguing about specific issues. Because people are so morally passionate about issues, which is wonderful, they start arguing amongst themselves. The Democrats just have to play anti-Republican. It's a great way for them to win. They just have to vote against the Republican. The Republicans weed out our own, and then people stay at home. They don't come and vote, and then we lose. I'm trying to play, your issues are your own, the candidates' issues are their own. Let people in the districts, the voters, the Republican voters, decide on what candidate they want based on those issues. At the party level, we're not getting into those issues. We're going with core philosophy and let the candidate, showcase the candidates. Let them show and talk about their issues directly to the voters.
This relates to something I know you guys are working on in Lake County. So I want to go to Oliver, and I know something that we've talked about in previous SFRs is that the party has struggled a little bit with this concept of how do we make sure we have the best nominees that can win, but not take sides and endorse in primaries. And obviously we had a huge blow up at the party that you reported on at previous SFRs. I know Keith has been facing that in Lake County. They've come up with what they think is a good solution to that. Can you first lay the groundwork of what's the challenge at the party in terms of endorsements and the controversies there? And then I want to pass it to Keith on what he's working on that might be a solution to that problem.
Sure. So about a month ago, there was a state central committee where there was a huge attempt to overtake our chairman, Don Tracy. And the whole impetus for that whole discussion was that on the agenda there was an endorsement committee, and folks from the more conservative parts of our party and the more moderate parts of our party, shall we say, you know, they saw that as them sort of taking away their voice at the table. And so it's just been a huge concern with all that stuff going on, and how do we find those quality candidates, I think, is a real question, because the moderates see that candidate in one camp and the conservatives see that in other camps. And something that in Lake County has been really successful is creating the benchmark program, which takes that completely out of the equation. It's like, okay, can you like open a bank account, you know, have a website, raise a little bit of money. And I think the sooner we stop, you know, considering people's philosophy and just trying to find good candidates, I think it's going to eliminate a lot of these issues that we see at the county level, at the state level, and it's going to take a ton of time to do, but I think it's worth doing. So
give us a little more about what Oliver was talking about there with the benchmark program that you guys have put together. I know the state has been looking at it as a possible model to help solve this problem without getting into the controversy of endorsing candidates.
So that was the crux of the problem, is that you're left with any number of candidates who want to run. You don't want to discourage people from running. Some people have better chances of winning than others, and some people are, frankly, better candidates and have more in their campaigns and are more successful. The party recognizes that at some level, it's obvious that you want to put resources into candidates who can win or who are going to win or who have more skin in the game, and they're more successful, as opposed to all of them. But then you're forced to pick a winner and a loser. And the party, to me, the party shouldn't be doing it. I get the problem. They're trying to attack it at the state level. My predecessor tried to attack it at the county level. It's a very relatable kind of a problem. And frankly, last cycle, we were left with any number of county board seats that were up, with the potential for many more of them being successful than others. And yet, without picking winners and losers, we had to give resources to everybody. I get that. So we developed in Lake County this benchmark program where we set aside objective factors, not even aspirational factors, just objective factors with certain time limits, with certain resource rewards, largely premised after the Young Guns program that they used in Congress and other kinds of programs. It basically said, look, if you're going to run, here are objective factors that you can do that are not hard. Setting, like Abby said, setting up a bank account, setting up a P.O. box, putting together a message. We don't even care about the quality of it. We're not looking at it. Just set it up, put it together, get your petitions ready, get your kitchen cabinet committee together, knock on a certain number of doors, raise a certain amount of money as a threshold on different parts of the cycle. And then the county will get involved and say, you've done your work, now we have to support you and do ours. And it's not that we're not going to support candidates who don't meet those benchmarks, but we just won't put in extraordinary resources. We won't necessarily, we'll have certain donor events for those who we can say to our donors, these are candidates who are really crushing it. They've met all of these objectives. There are verifiable objective factors that they've met. And at the end, it'll come with certain monetary awards that will go directly to candidates to help get them across the finish line. So the state heard that we were doing this, and the state party chairman asked me to do a presentation for the larger county chairs up here in the suburbs. They loved it. And then Rhonda Belford, the president of the County Chairs Association in Illinois, asked me to do a presentation to all of the county chairs, and it's been very, very warmly received. So it's look, anything we can do in Lake County for us that is then used by others across the state, I think is wonderful.
Well, and it goes to just a different way of thinking. And I look at your board, whether it's you, and I know Matt assists with a lot of this stuff there as well. You've got people who are saying, hey, I don't necessarily need to be tied down to the way it's always been done. What's the smartest way to approach this, the best way to approach this? You know, our politics, right of center, have struggled with this for a long time of, oh, we've always done it this way. Well, guess what? We're losing. So to say we've always done it this way and we're losing, those two things probably go together. So maybe addressing things and coming up with better ideas is a wise play. Matt, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's not only good for the candidates, it certainly is, but it's also good for the party too, because then when you decide to endorse or you decide to subjectively support candidates, then someone's always going to go away being upset. And why would we want to turn away good candidates, even if we might disagree with them a little bit, or good people who want to be involved with the party when we're losing? The Democrats can afford to turn people away because they're winning. Well, when we keep losing, we need everyone we can get. And with this, it encourages people, hey, maybe we don't agree with you on everything, but there's still a place for you. And if you're not going to win this time, you could run next time, or we'll get you involved some way. And for the first time in a long time, I think everyone's been rowing in the same direction, which is a breath of fresh air to me.
Yeah, and it's uncommon in Lake County to see that level of unity. And I think a big thing goes to candidate quality. I mean, we are, as a party, we're tied to our candidates, for better or for worse. I mean, we talk a lot about the presidential race. We're tied to who we nominate for president, and that's what I'm going to talk about next, so be ready. And it all comes down to the quality of those candidates. I know the cameras are faced this way, but one of the gentlemen who came in, who's going to be joining us tonight, is Rich Hill, who I'm smiling at, who's back there, who was the mayor of Round Lake Beach here in Lake County. And as he stepped away, he helped find a good guy, a great guy to run for mayor, who now runs it, Scott Nichols, who's doing a great job. And it was the quality of leadership and making sure there was a succession plan and making sure that these communities have these quality leaders in place. We're not going to get anywhere unless we can get higher quality candidates to represent our party, because let's face it, no matter what work you do as party chair, once it's campaign season, the press is calling the candidates. They're not calling you. They represent our party for better or for worse.
Yeah, and it's even more than that. It's not only good quality candidates, but candidates who can message properly, who can, so we don't have to play the gotcha game. Because we already know last cycle, I mean, it was just some of the stuff that I saw. They ran against Justice Burke, who was a sitting Supreme Court justice. They ran anti-abortion ads against him. As a judge, he hasn't had an abortion opinion publicly in more than a decade. He can't. The Judicial Inquiry Board would have crushed him on that. He hasn't had one. And yet, the ads literally said, pro-life people who want to take away your right to abortion support Justice Burke. Therefore, he has the same opinion. And it's absurd on its face, but we know it's coming.
Yep.
And as a result, we have to be able to have good candidates who can message through that. So it's really a multi-tier process.
Yeah. Well, and we also have to be cognizant of the fact that this presidential race is coming up, and we're going to be going into a presidential election year, which means that the fates of a lot of our candidates on the Republican side are going to be tied to who we nominate for president, for better or for worse. We've talked on SFR, so it's not going to be a surprise to the people who watch and listen to this, that no matter where you stand on the former president, you have to think politically. That's our job. We think politics. And so, in a state like Illinois, where he does very poorly, that is Trump, the former president, if we nominate him again, that's going to be a challenge, especially in suburban areas. So I don't want to get you in trouble. Just say what you're comfortable saying. But in a county like Lake County, Trump has been a bit of a drag on the ticket for your candidates in the past. And while I know you can't necessarily pick sides, I'm sure this is something you're concerned about for this next election cycle, right?
So President Trump, no matter what you think of his policies, is a chaotic factor. You're never quite sure what's going to happen. There's a level of excitement that he brings because people are always yearning at the top for a fighter for them.
Yep.
They really have gotten to the point of tribalism where they're looking for someone to fight for their issues, especially people who feel like they've been forgotten by the government, that just keeps feeding itself and is so big that it's forgotten the people who actually it works for, who fund it. Trump represented all of that for us. And to be quite honest, his policies were very successful. Now, on the other side, I'm not quite sure that he's able to get out of his way. He is who he is. He's a marketing genius, a self-promoter that knows no bounds, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily play well in some of the Lake County suburbs, and actually the Collier County suburbs also. It just doesn't. And I think a lot of people in the suburbs are looking for a measure of stability, of calm. They don't want the circus anymore. People are tired of it. And he just still manages to bring it wherever he comes. So if he's our nominee, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and listen, we're objective and we're honest in this. We've got counties we work in, because we work statewide, where Trump does very well, where if he gets nominated, we're going to pick up even more seats and do very well. And I'm sure we'll have SFRs in some of those regions. And we'll ask the question, and they'll say that they want Trump to be nominated. It's a big state. I think we're specifically just talking about Lake County and suburban politics, and that's where it tends to hurt us. But I want to make sure I go over to Chris, because Chris is our biggest Trump supporter of the group. So, I mean, Chris, what are your thoughts on the current discussion?
So, for first and foremost, I wouldn't label myself a Trump supporter.
Okay.
I am a Trump believer that he's going to be the
So
nominee.
believer. You're a believer.
I'm an acceptor of reality, Colin.
Okay. All right.
And here's the thing about President Trump is that President Trump does very well, perhaps in the outer periphery of the county. Those districts that touch places like McHenry County and places like that. Those are the places where President Trump isn't going to be as much of a drain on the Republican ticket as the rest of the county. However, as I mentioned in previous SFRs, the area of the county that Republicans need to start doing better in, that they previously had done better in order to start competing countywide, is the southeast portion of the county along the lake shore, which historically have voted very fiscally conservative and for people such as Bruce Rauner back when he was governor, but don't necessarily vote for other Republicans because, well, President Trump has moved them so far away from the party. So the Republican Party in Lake County, I believe, needs to, even with Trump on the ticket, needs to be messaging itself down ballot to those voters to try and pick up there. Unfortunately, I don't think you can really get away from the Trump factor. In some cases, you probably have to run away from him, just because that's the nature of the geography and the political landscape.
Yeah, I mean, there are big pockets in this county. I think southeast, southwest, even central. There's a lot of the voters you're talking about. There's a lot of Hispanics. You get into the Round Lake, the Mundelein, even the Wakanda areas into Waukegan. You've got North Chicago up to Zion. There's a lot of African American population there, a lot of black voters. There are pockets, and in some areas he may be helpful, and in most areas just not as helpful. But you've got a very diverse electorate that overall, the top of the ticket is going to be pretty important for our electoral chances this next election. Yeah.
And I want to add something. You mentioned Hispanic voters, and you mentioned Round Lake Beach earlier. Round Lake Beach has a very strong growing Hispanic community. Those are voters that, if you look at other places in the country, not everywhere, but in other places across the country, and even in the state of Illinois where I'm from, Hispanic voters are gradually moving slowly to the right.
Yep.
And they're being, in some cases, abandoned by the Democratic Party because they've taken them for granted. That's partially why you saw such low Hispanic turnout last November's election and in even the Chicago mayoral election, is because those voters aren't being engaged with to the degree that they previously were when the Democrats were trying to bring them into the fold. Now Republicans have an opportunity there, especially with suburban Latinos, to kind of bring them into the umbrella of the Republican Party. It requires work, it requires money, it requires resources, but it's an opportunity for the Republican Party if they can take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, think about Round Lake Beach, even Mundelein. I mean, these are local communities that vote for right of center local elected officials. I mean, even the Democrats that get elected in Mundelein in this county tend to be pretty fiscally conservative and more right of center on fiscal issues. So I think a lot of these Hispanic communities you're seeing where there's business owners, there's entrepreneurial individuals, people who are looking at these fiscal issues maybe different than previous generations. And so there's huge opportunities, but we got to put in the work. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I know Chris is talking a lot about Round Lake Beach. He has a special love for that town now because I forced him to come up here and door knock one Saturday here, and he never lets me live that down.
Never going to forget that, Terrell.
All right, last Lake County topic. Then I want to go. I know we've got listeners all across the state, so we'll get into some state topics. But last Lake County topic. We talked about this last week. One of the biggest races in all of Illinois is not a congressional race. It's not a legislative race. It's not even a judicial race. It's a state's attorney race. We all expected that the Cook County State's Attorney race was going to be the biggest race, but Kim Foxx wisely decided not to try to run for re-election after underperforming the top of her ticket by 35 points. Probably a wise decision. That means the next most vulnerable politician, most likely in the suburbs, is the Lake County State's Attorney, who was a big supporter of Kim Foxx and her policies, was a big supporter of the Safety Act, unapologetically progressive on these issues. He's up for re-election, and it doesn't sound like, based on his re-election announcement last week, that he's tempering that at all.
No, he's not. I mean, look, in the state's attorney's defense, I think he comes by his philosophy honestly. Now, contrary to that, I just don't believe it's a good philosophy to have if you're the state's attorney. He was a defense attorney once upon a time, and he's worked within the Lake County system for some years. I just don't think, and neither do 100 of the other counties in Illinois besides Cook County, that the philosophy of the state's attorney should be supporting stuff like the Safety Act and other measures which are not helping to reduce crime and are not helping to do what the state's attorney's essential job is to the population, which is to be the attorney for the county and deal with prosecuting criminals. That's just not the philosophy of the state's attorney. And again, you mentioned his re-election announcement. I think he doubled down on that. He talked about all things political and talked very little bit on crime. And at the end of the day, look, whether you're in the suburbs or not, voters respond well to the fact that there's less money in their pocket, they feel less safe on the streets, and a whole host of other kitchen table sort of issues. And the safe on the streets issue resonates directly with the state's attorney. And I think Kim Foxx, you're right, decided not to run again. Although I suspect if she did, she'd be reelected anyway. So I'm not quite sure what is behind that. But Eric doesn't have that luxury. So our state's attorney, I hope he's up for a fight, because we're going to have a really good candidate for the general election who's going to be up against him. And I think if we come at this in a very honest way and appeal to voters in what we believe the state's attorney's job is, and the core principles again of the Republican Party, that Eric's going to have a real big fight in his hands to stay elected.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are really interested in this race. We've heard some names of some people who are really intriguing, who are looking at the race itself, but a whole lot of others who are like, give us a candidate, we're ready to get out there. They want to win this seat. And I think something that really stood out to me in his announcement that, yeah, he talked about a lot of social issues and a lot of progressive issues, but what really stood out to me was, the fact that he said he refused to work with state's attorneys who didn't hold his political beliefs.
It was amazing.
And to me, it's,
Amazing.
the voters in Illinois have proven that they just want their government to work. They don't care as much about the politics like junkies like we do. They just want their government to work. And when you've got an elected official, a leader of your county who says, you know what, I'm just not going to do that part of my job because they don't agree with me politically, to me, I feel like that's a key vulnerability. It looks like we've got some people who have some thoughts on the team. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to bring up our state's attorney in DuPage County, Bob Brin. So he actually caught a lot of heat when they were trying to amend the Safety Act in Springfield, because he was working with other Democrat state's attorneys to try and make that bill better. And he thought, he was very adamant, I know this is frustrating for you guys, but I want to have a seat at the table and make this policy better. And that's very frustrating to hear that other state's attorneys are like, well, I don't agree with your political philosophy, so I'm just not going to have the discussion. I just think that's not helpful to anyone, especially in the state's attorney's office.
Yeah. Well, I mean, practice what you preach, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the left says to us a lot, why don't you guys work with us? In Springfield, they're constantly saying, oh, Republicans didn't want to work with us. We get somebody like a Bob Brin who wants to work with the other side, and then they have no interest. And then here we see that on the progressive side, they have no interest in working with us. So, it's speaking out of both sides of your mouth. But I know this is your county, Matt. What are your thoughts?
I think Republicans have a really unique opportunity, because what's the main issue, the main political headwind that's going in our favor right now, I know there's not many, but it's public safety. Moms and people who aren't traditionally involved politically, they care about the rising crime. They care about criminals not being prosecuted. And what's the one political office that has the main job of prosecuting criminals is the state's attorney. And it's up in 2 years. Well, now less than 2 years, which is weird to think about. This is the topic, the issue that Republicans can win on, and it is the highest elected office holder in the county. So we got to do something about it.
Well, yeah, and we're talking about, petitions get passed in 2.5 months, believe it or not. So, this election cycle's coming up on us fast, and this is going to be a big race.
What you talked about it, and it's really, as a rehabilitated elected official myself, it's a nice way of saying when you lost re-election, what you can say. It's sort of appalling, and it should be to all elected officials. Once you run, and you run under a ticket, and you run hard on your issues, you're competing for an elected office. But once you're in there, the party banners don't matter. Yeah. Everyone in that district is your constituent. Everyone in Lake County is State Attorney Reinhardt's constituent, and it's his duty to work with other elected offices. When I was circuit court clerk, we worked with anybody, and it didn't matter. And we stayed in our appropriate lanes in that political office. If you want to change the law, you don't refuse to work with other elected officials. You go to the legislature. You work with them to change the law. It's not your job to refuse to work with other elected offices to get the people's business done. It's not your job.
Yep. Yeah, and I think what's been amazing to me about this change in Lake County, we saw it in DuPage. As DuPage went blue, Republicans, when they lead, they want to lead. This county was never partisan. The county board, I remember the fights that the Lake County, the Republican chairman, not the one before you, but 2 and 3 before you, would fight with this county board over and over, because the Republican county board members would not become partisan and would not get involved in partisan races. The county was run in a nonpartisan way under Republican leadership. When we think about Mike Nierheim, the former state's attorney who did a great job, and Waller before him, they weren't partisan in any way. They didn't push a political agenda. They did the job for the people that they were elected to do. I think that's a very basic difference between Republican leadership in this county and Democratic leadership is, are you going to push a specific agenda, or are you going to do the job that you were elected to do?
Right.
And as we talked about just a few minutes ago, the voters do pay attention to that, and they do notice that, and we do see the Republicans that are willing to work across the aisle. They're the ones that tend to win more.
Yeah, I mean, it's a governing philosophy of getting things done for the people. That's what they elected you to do in the first place. All right, let's move from Lake County topics. We've got an agenda that I know we won't get through all of it this week, but I want to make sure we get through some of these topics. And I'd love to get Keith's thoughts, though. In some cases, he may be hamstrung, so we won't get him in trouble. But I know we've got a race that kind of touches Lake County a little bit. There was a candidate who announced, Maria Peterson, who ran for the state Senate. Matt's given his thoughts already. Might as well just give him the mic. We're
just gonna give Matt the mic.
Terrible, nasty woman.
All right, that was Matt's personal thoughts. Sheesh. So we've got the Trump impersonations already. So Maria Peterson ran against Dan McConkey for the state Senate. That was in District 26, I believe, and she came fairly close to winning. And that's the Senate district that has where Said beat Chris Boss. So the Republicans already lost one of those two state rep districts. Well, now it was announced we're recording this on Tuesday. It was announced today that Maria Peterson would be running against Marty McLaughlin for the state rep district, and that's House District 52. So let me pass it to you, Matt, to give some thoughts on what we're looking at in that race. It looks like it's going to be a pretty tough race.
Yeah, I'll spare the Trump impersonations. That'll be for later. But luckily, the House District 52 is a little bit more conservative than Dan McConkey's seat, so this should be good news for Marty McLaughlin, who's the current incumbent Republican there. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have to work hard and that it's not going to be a fight. And as we've seen in the past few election cycles, traditionally Republican seats are less Republican than we so thought. So Marty's going to have to work hard, and we can see the Democrats are definitely trying to make their plays there. It's smart on their part. Why not run someone who's already ran in that district and already has some name recognition? We should be doing the same thing in other districts.
I mean, she had run before even running against McConkey, so this is her third race, I think, maybe her fourth. So she's been out. Now she has been rejected by voters multiple times. We'll talk in a second about, some of our candidates like to get rejected multiple times and still run again. So both sides will do this. But those are districts. I mean, you look at what was Chris Boss's district. Now you look at the district Marty McLaughlin holds. We've got Ed Sullivan, the former state rep, who covered that area. I mean, Republicans held on to those seats for a very long time. It's only been the last 2 or 4 years that these have started to slip through our fingers. Some through having poor candidates, some through just the partisan politics changing in the suburbs. But those districts have been slipping out of our fingers.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that her campaign co-chair is Nabila Syed, who's the 51st state representative. And I don't know why you would want to have a more progressive person be the co-chair of a more conservative district, especially a really new young face. Maybe that's part of their strategy. I don't know.
It could be. We'll pass it over to Chris. I will say that the math is that the district we're talking about, McLaughlin's district, is about 4% more Republican than that state Senate district. So it is a little bit more favorable, but we're also talking about this being a presidential election year. So you're going to see that in some of these suburban districts, no matter who we nominate, you'll see higher minority turnout, higher young voter turnout, which means that will be an advantage for some of the Democratic candidates. Chris, what are your thoughts?
So there's two things in relation to the Nabila Syed co-chairmanship of her campaign committee. Don't be surprised if there's more than one candidate for a primary. When you're running for any office, you want to make sure your campaign chairman or co-chair is someone of some influence. So putting an incumbent state representative from the district right next door to you might deter some more progressive candidate from jumping in the race, and all gives you progressive credentials entering a Democratic primary. Now, that being said, let us remember that the northern suburbs are not like my neck of the woods. In the northern suburbs, Democratic voters are much, much more progressive than where I come from. So someone like Nabila Syed is going to have some influence with Democratic primary voters and voters in general. I mean, she beat Chris Boss, didn't she? She has a mandate from voters in a very similar demographic area. So that's probably why they're bringing her into this race and putting her as co-chair, to deter primary challengers and to bump up some progressive credentials of somebody who's already won a race in the area who might be able to help her out. And she's already raised a good chunk of change from what I saw. So I think this is going to be one of the most high-profile races in the suburbs. I don't think Marty McLaughlin is going to walk into winning this race. Did he even have a challenger last year?
Marty has not had a real challenge. So he got in, and he really hasn't had a tough race since he's been in. And so now I will say, to Marty's credit, he was the mayor of Barrington Hills, and that was a huge race to get into that. He unseated an incumbent who had been in office for a very long time. So he's not new to tough races, but for a state legislative race, this will be his toughest challenge.
And this is going to be a test not only for Marty McLaughlin, but the current House Republican organization. There's going to be a lot of money pouring into this race on the Democratic side. Well, after Welch pours all the money into everybody's going to get primary because it's the Democratic Party. Nothing's ever good enough for them. But there's going to be a lot of money coming into that race, I'd imagine, from the Democratic House staff and their Democratic organizations. So this is going to be a big, very, very high-profile race for the area, so it's just something to watch. Will Marty McLaughlin hang on? Obviously, this is the day of the first challenger's announcement, very early, but I think it's going to be very high-profile.
Well, and I want to pass it to Keith in a second. Before I do that, though, I just want to talk about how there are 2 districts there. Remember, 51 is where Saeed was successful in flipping the seat, but that is still, if not the most, one of the most Republican districts in the whole state currently held by a Democrat. So if Republicans are smart and they're going to play offense here, they put a candidate into Saeed's district, which means she's not going to have the wherewithal to help Peterson in her own race. I mean, we have a pickup opportunity in 51, so it's a situation of playing defense by playing offense. I mean, we can get those resources needing to be put into 51 so that 52 is less vulnerable. I mean, is that not a smart strategy to get in there and try to flip that seat and force their eyeballs over in that direction instead?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I know at least 4 different groups, all eyeballs are on the 51st. If there's an opportunity to take back a House seat, I think it's that seat. It'll be definitely difficult, and Nabila has shown time and time again, well, one time, but now her re-election, that she's willing to work hard.
Yeah.
She's able to access donor pools that are traditionally outside of Illinois. So we need a different kind of candidate, someone who's going to work hard and who also matches the district.
Yeah, I mean, that is not going to be an easy win at all. She's a hard worker. She's definitely proven she's got talent. Any thoughts on those couple races?
Yeah, I think you all were largely correct that Nabila is only going to be useful in a primary because she's going to have her own general election fight, and she knows it. So she's going to largely be distracted with her own re-election and telling the voters there what she's done in the last couple of years, which, from my read of it, is largely nothing. But that being said, look, it is smart for the Democrats to push everywhere they can in Lake County and connect to Lake County because they're getting some unexpected results. And I think it's largely off externalities, but nevertheless, results are what they are. So why not push? If I were in their shoes, I would do the same thing. But I do think Marty McLaughlin's a friend, and he's been a long-time serving rep. I think he's good for the district, and I think he's going to be successful, and we're going to help him any way we can.
Yeah, Marty has always been one of those, I'll be the first to say, just great in office, great leader. He was a great mayor. He's great as an elected representative. Marty's challenge is just he hates the politics side of it. He hates the campaigning, which is why he's a great leader. I mean, some of the best leaders are the ones who just can't stand the politics of it. But he's going to need to get into those politics. I mean, he hasn't had to fundraise much, and he hasn't done great on fundraising in his previous races. He's going to need the money here. This is going to be, a real race. It's going to be 6 figures up, and so he's going to have to get into some of those things he doesn't necessarily love. But you know what? Like we said, he's done it before. I think he can do it. But this is definitely not going to be a walk in the park race.
No, look, none of the races in Lake County are going to be easy. None of them. Whether it's Tom Weber that has a little bit, mostly McHenry and a little bit of Lake County, Greg Wilcox with the same thing. We don't take any of them for granted. None of them are going to be easy. We're always going to run like we're 10 points down and invest heavily as much as we can in all of these races. Truthfully, we have some races to win. We're playing, we haven't been winning in the last few years. So right now we've got to claw our way back out and keep the seats we have, so everything is precious.
Yeah. I mentioned candidates who like to run multiple times, so we got to talk about the 14th because there was another candidate announcement this week. We've all kind of known that this individual was going to run, but he finally made it public this week. Jim Marter has announced that he'll be running for Congress on the 14th. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Jim Marter has run for at least 36 other offices, I think. I'm being a little facetious. And I want to make it clear, I like Jim. He's an awesome guy who does work super hard for the party. But unfortunately, as a candidate, he hasn't necessarily been successful. He's given it another go. Give us more details on that, Oliver.
Oh man, so Chris and I were actually in the office today, and we were trying to figure out how many times Jim has run for Congress, and we couldn't really figure it out. So I think we all see this as a challenge. Jim, he runs the Kendall County Republicans. He's a very conservative guy, and he's been very active in our party and has done quite a bit for our party. But he's had a few unsuccessful runs for Congress, and I think he keeps trying to make a go at it. And for the 14th is one of our most high priority races, and we really need a stronger candidate than Jim. Like, great guy, but that candidate that is, we talk about candidate quality, there's just, the candidate quality is just not there for Jim, and we're gonna need someone who can raise that money, who can go toe to toe with Lauren Underwood, and that's just gonna be a tall task. And
Well, I mentioned Danny Rogers, who is a friend of Keith's and a friend of mine. Actually, Keith's wearing his Grill Master socks. He and
Barbecue.
He and Dan Rogers are part of a barbecue team. They make incredible food, so you should try to get up there to taste some of their barbecue. And I remember conversations with Danny where he ran for office multiple times and was successful sometimes, was unsuccessful sometimes. And it was a conversation me and Dan had where I said, "Listen, man, your skills are behind the curtain. You are you are a political animal. Sometimes some people, just the voters like certain people, they don't like others. It's maybe your fault, that may not be your fault, but it just is the reality of politics." And he hasn't run since. He's worked behind the scenes and he's gotten people elected all throughout the region because he focused on what he does best. And I think it's a similar thing with Jim Marter, where I know a lot of people in that region really like and respect Jim. I like him. I've met him a few times. He's a great guy. He works his butt off, but there are just sometimes, for whatever reason, that just you don't resonate with the voters. And at a certain point, you got to recognize, you know what, my talents can be used in a space where I'm not necessarily putting my name on the yard sign. In a race like the 14th, that's so important to Republicans if we're ever going to pick up seats, we're going to need a tier 1 candidate. And as this is no disrespect to Jim, he hasn't shown that he is that tier 1 candidate, tier 1 recruit. And it's not, again, it's not to attack the guy. It's just, this is electoral reality. Chris, what are your thoughts?
And the thing about the 14th Congressional District is you have so many strong grassroots Republican organizations within that county. You have the Smiths out in LaSalle County. You have the Plainfield Township organization in Will County. Some very, very strong grassroots organizations. I just think it's time to give somebody else a chance. I mean, Jim's ran in every election for the past decade. I remember when he was primarying Mark Kirk back in 2016. I remember seeing his yard signs even around me from people who thought Kirk was too liberal. But it's time to give somebody else a chance. Let's try and find someone new from the grassroots for that district. It's a very grassroots district. I think the candidate for the 14th has to resonate with the grassroots of this party. But you need to give somebody else a chance, and I think that's where we're at right now. We need to give somebody else a chance.
Well, we've seen this. I mean, listen, I started in politics. I was a young kid. I mean, Keith knows I was a young pup, and I faced that over and over. I know you guys have faced it a lot too, being younger in politics. No one wants to give you that first opportunity. No one wants to give you that chance because it's their turn. And if someone deserves, the ability to, let's say, serve in Congress, it's somebody like Jim, who's carried water for the elephant for decades. But at a certain point, you have to be that self-sacrificing person who says, for the good of the party, I'm going to invest in this other person and help build them up and help grow them. That's how you grow this party. Is we almost need a generation of leaders who are willing to say, you know what, we won't fix Illinois, but those people we find and train and prepare, they're going to fix Illinois. But I think for too long in our politics in the state, we all have to be king. We've got those people who make a little noise, show a little talent, and then they lose it all because they need a radio gig or they have to be important, and it all is about them. It's not about the party. We need some self-sacrificing leaders if we're going to ever turn this around.
So I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian. So I know Jim
Let's do it.
a little bit. Obviously, as Kendall County Chairman, I've been working with him. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders. I don't know his issues. I don't really know him as a candidate. Here's what I hope. I don't look to exclude people from running, but what I do hope is they run a good race on issues, and then if they lose the primary, they do everything they can to help elect.
And
the
Jim
person who
has
does.
done that. I will give Jim credit. Every time he runs, when he gets to the general, he does support the nominee. So as much as we're maybe giving a little bit of the other side of it, you're right. I mean, Jim is a good person who does the right thing.
And I think as Kendall County Chairman, he can bring those resources to really help in that particular race. And so I don't know I don't know much about him as a campaigner. I don't know much about his successes. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders just generally for Kendall County Chairman. But I wouldn't count him out. Everyone's got their time. But at the same time, if he does fall short, I really do hope that he jumps in head first and helps whoever does win beat Lauren Underwood.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a race we got to win. John and I, who's not here, so I I won't cheat and get into it, but I mean, we have differing opinions of how in play the 14th is, but it's certainly one of the most in play of these congressional seats. So it's not one that we can take lightly. We definitely need a good nominee, and you know what? Jim deserves a chance to try to prove he's that guy. So I'm just hoping we have a spirited race with some quality candidates in that race, so that we've got some options to choose from. Final thoughts on the 14th before we go to the next topic? Anybody? We good?
I think we're good. Oh, Chris?
Chris always has more thoughts.
I'm still waiting for Bob Fioriti to announce his candidacy for the 14th Congressional District.
We're taking away the microphone now.
We gave Oliver control of the mic over there because we ain't
They
dummies.
really would be lost without me.
Yeah, we give it to the one responsible person. All right, so speaking of Oliver, this has been on the agenda to talk about for a few
Yes.
weeks, so we're going to finally get to it.
Okay.
There is drama in DuPage County. The Democrat County Board Chair is at odds with the Democrat County Clerk. Give us
Yes.
a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, so we talked a few weeks ago that the clerk was just refusing to pay her bills over just basically some policy procedures.
To pay the county bills.
County's bills, yes.
Yeah.
So on a positive note, she has started paying her bills, and she showed up at a public meeting, which she hasn't done. I know,
Wow.
which is a big deal for her. But on the bad news was that when she was there, she said, I cannot guarantee that I will continue to paying the county's bills in the future because I do not agree with this budget transfer process. And as a result of that, our chairman, Deb Conroy, said, hey, maybe you don't get control of the elections anymore, which is a big deal for Jean because she ran as an election. I'm an election watchdog. I'm going to be the one that helps clean up elections here in DuPage County. So that is a huge mandate on Jean Kazmarek as a clerk. And a fun side note is that we had an election commission in DuPage that ran our elections independently of the clerk's office for a long time. I believe Deb Conroy was actually one of the people that sponsored that bill to take that into the clerk's office, and now she's kind of reaping what she sows with some of the stuff that's gone on in DuPage. I know you've all seen it with Bob Grogan and just the lawsuit with Deanne Mazzocchi, so there's just been a lot of controversy, so we'll stay tuned to see what happens next. It's always something new.
It is always funny to me how politics changes your bedfellows over time, and this is one of those situations where, Conroy's had to have a change of heart based on, the county clerk there is Democrats and Republicans agree is a problem in DuPage County, and definitely a vulnerable seat. But when even your Democrat County Board Chair, who has proven to be very much a tribalist, she's her team, and all she cares about is her team. What you see now is that she's having to go against her own team publicly.
Right, and I think she's gotten a lot of respect from Republicans for it, quite frankly. I mean, as much as I wanted to see Greg Hart win that race, I mean, she's been very fair, and I think she recognizes that Jean, even though she's a part of her own party, is not popular even amongst her own party, and that it just can't continue this way.
Yeah. So the drama is not just confined to Lake County.
No, there is a certain amount of schadenfreude. As a political junkie, I like it when the other party who's in power, who controls all the chess pieces, start arguing amongst themselves, and I can just grab a bucket of popcorn.
DuPage Democrats are great at that, by the way.
Yes, and you know what? I'm a big fan of that. That makes for great political theater, and I don't have to get involved. I can just see who wins. That's great political theater.
Oh man, seriously, every Tuesday they have their finance committee meeting, and it's just like I get out my snack, and it's just a great way to get through the day. It's just so entertaining.
I think we need hobbies.
Yes, I think we do.
I think we do.
Speaking of needing hobbies,
So you guys talk so highly of your Democratic infighting, but nothing will ever beat the Will County Democrats, somebody leaving, and that's why Republicans control the Will County Board now.
it's unfortunate that we only started doing these public, the last 5-6 weeks, because people missed some great discussions, and I think most people aren't aware of what the heck happened in Will County. We'll be doing a smoke-filled room in Will County at some point in the near future. Let's make sure we tell that story when we do, because it's an amazing story. And it proves how sometimes smart politics tends to play out, to win out over anything else.
One of the things that helps me sleep at night, especially knowing with all the drama that goes on in Republican circles, is knowing that the Democrats have it just as bad, if not worse. So.
Yeah, well, that and your extensive doll collection that helps you fall asleep at night.
That's true. Yes, it's stuffed animals.
Stuffed
but
animals,
there we
right?
go.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a stuffed animal of each of you, so.
Yes.
Hey, at least he did his hair today, so progress, baby steps.
It's just, we do appreciate Matt finding where his comb is, and
That's right.
and that was nice of him. Let's talk about another Lake County topic, though it is more of a Chicago topic, but we can talk sports a little bit. Because the Chicago Bears, we kind of hinted at it last week, but we knew we'd be here this week, so we figured let's save the topic. Waukegan has thrown their hat in the ring to potentially be one of the locations at play here for the Chicago Bears to move to. So I guess I'll just start with Keith. What are your thoughts on the Bears moving and now Lake County's even in play maybe?
I love it. Look, anything closer to my home with the Bears means that I can see more Bears games. Quite frankly, Soldier Field's iconic. It's always going to be one of those stadiums that is just, no matter what you do with it, it's still Soldier Field. That being said, Bears shopping around, I think is great. And I think it's great for Waukegan and Lake County. Anything you can do to add to the economic development and particularly in sports. Yeah. It's a rebuilding year, maybe. They could win, maybe. Aaron Rodgers isn't with
As
the
a
Packers.
Lions fan, I would say it's definitely rebuilding.
With the Packers looking so awful this year and with the Lions being way overhyped, it could be our year.
It could, every year. Right now, we're tied as in first place with the rest of the team.
Yeah.
So we're good right now.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
But I'd be very excited if they came to Waukegan, and I really do think that bringing the Bears to Waukegan would add a great economic punch to this whole area.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Waukegan is an area that has had development, but this would certainly just kickstart that and really help the northeastern region of this county, which has I wouldn't say struggled, but it certainly has struggled economically a bit. I mean, you go from sort of along the lakefront there, probably 2/3 of the county along the lakefront there has some great local leaders that are fighting and working, but to jumpstart their economic development, I think would be great for the whole region.
Yeah, I would love it if the Bears would come here. I think it's still a long shot.
Yeah.
I'm glad Lake County and certainly Waukegan is participating in that discussion. I think it makes the other places that are considering maybe up the ante a little bit, which is great. Again, I'm all for that level of competition, so bring it on.
Yeah, I mean, I joked, it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago that I joked with Matt because there was a black bear found near Gurney Mills by Matt, and I was like, man, are the Bears gonna pop in here? And then suddenly it was like Waukegan announced that they were suiting the Bears or courting the Bears. I was like, wow, this is great.
Everyone was freaking out that there was a black bear in Gurnee, but I was like, just put a goalpost and then it'll go far away.
Yeah, there you go. That's one way to do it.
Ouch. Double doink Matt.
Yeah. Wow, we all miss.
I was actually at that game.
We all miss Robbie Gould. So let's be honest. It's every time I watch Robbie Gould hit a field goal for not the Bears, I cry a little bit and my soul hurts. Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple
To the Packers fans.
So a couple insights from a Packers fan. One related to sports, one serious related to the stadium. Number one, the Bears are going to be 7-10 next year, and you're going to like it. No matter how bad the Packers are going to be.
Which game, which week does Jordan Love get benched?
I think you're underestimating Jordan Love. I think he's going to be pretty good. Small sample size we have, he's been pretty good. So we'll see what happens. We've been good for a while. I'm prepared for a bad season.
Yeah, I don't think any Packers fan is prepared for what's going to happen.
I'm ready for it personally.
Another thing where being a Packers fan has some insight on a place like Waukegan, according to Bears. Unlike Naperville, you can actually find some places in Waukegan to put a Bears stadium where in Naperville I couldn't.
Well, they have,
find where.
from what we've heard, they have 3 really good sites that would work really well.
Here's my issue. Being somebody who's been to Lambeau Field for a playoff game or in a regular season game, the entire state of Wisconsin kind of congregates in Green Bay, and it's hell to get out of and to get into on a Packers game day. I can see that being a problem if the Bears move to Waukegan, where the entire state of Illinois congregates on Waukegan, and everybody's trying to get in at one time and out at another time. I see that being an issue here, but again, that's just my experience.
Yeah, I mean they've got a highway there. They've got good access roads. I mean, certainly I don't want to wade into the Route 53 debate, but having Route 53 extended would have helped this. But I don't want Joe Mancino to come after me, so I'll be careful. But I mean, I don't think that they'll have as much of an issue as some of these other places they're looking at. Like Naperville's site that they're looking at isn't like as centrally located, as easily accessible from the highway, from the metro station, whereas at least when you look at Waukegan's, it is a little better accessible. Nothing is as accessible as the Arlington Heights location, which is why everyone just sort of assumes that all this is a leverage play. It's all just to get some leverage.
Our office, which is also
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to complain. If they move to Arlington Heights, it's literally minutes from my house, minutes from our office. Yeah, that wouldn't be the worst. So please, Bears, please.
Plus, do we really want to give more airtime to Naperville? God love them all, but they're already complaining, and it hasn't even started yet. So.
Yeah, fair. All right, we're low on time, so let's get caught up on a couple topics. Number one, so let's pass this over to Chris. I know we've got a topic that actually I'm glad Keith is here for because he's got a good attorney background as well. So as happens a lot in politics, you've got candidates who win and lose who don't like what their opponent said, and some of them decide to take it to the courts, to complain to the courts about how their opponent said this about them or that about them. Well, former Rep. Denise Wang Stoneback is suing the current representative, Kevin Olickal, and also an organization called G-PAC, because she doesn't like what they said about her in that election. Chris, you got some details for us on that?
Yes, I do. This is a very interesting story because it kind of shows how the Democratic Party eats their own at its worst. So Denise Wayne Stoneback is the former state representative from kind of the northern portion of Chicago, around Skokie, around that Rogers Park area, by my understanding. And she had previously beaten Representative Mark Kalish off the reasoning that Mark Kalish was not strong enough on gun control and he wasn't strong enough on abortion. So she was elected in 2020. Come 2022, she was the one being primaried because she had not voted on a bill that was reforming the FOID card. There was some amendment added to the bill which she did not approve of, therefore she did not vote for it, and the gun control lobby went crazy over this. And she is somebody who has had her own gun control organization.
She's a lifelong proponent of gun control.
Yeah, and she got the gun control lobby came after her and accused her of siding with far-right extremists, how she wants to put guns in the arms of criminals and all of this stuff. So, and she lost this last primary mainly because of that messaging. And now she's suing G-PAC, who's responsible for a lot of this negative advertising, and current Representative Olickal, who has beaten her for, is it defamation or for just wrongful?
I think it's defamation.
Yeah, it's defamation.
Which is, the problem is with defamation, and Keith can fill us in, is it's very, very hard to prove. Before we get into this, I want to get your perspective on that, because I know you've dealt with this. It's really hard to prove that.
It is. So against a public figure, there's a New York Times case that goes way back, which basically dictated our current standards for defamation. So it's a subjective standard. So it's not even to the ordinary man an objective standard of, were they telling the truth? Did they recklessly disregard the truth? Did they knowingly promote falsity? It's a subjective standard. You literally have to show, for the most part, that someone themselves subjectively knew what they were saying was absolute garbage and was recklessly disregarding the truth and was just promoting absolute falsity. It's the reason that on the campaign trail, you don't see defamation suits left and right, because it's just such a high standard, and hyperbole can factor in, and reasonable interpretations of things, and truthfully, people are entitled to their opinion. So it's a very, very, very high standard of being able to prove defamation against a public figure.
And I think that's the point, is it's not about proving were they right or were they wrong in what they said. You have to prove they knew they were wrong and said it anyways, and that is a really, really hard thing to prove.
See, look, example A, there actually is a use for attorneys in our everyday lives. Who would have thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge, but what I find so, frankly, deliciously ironic is that for years, this has been the playbook of Mike Madigan and their operation, which was take the smallest thing and build it up and play it up in these primaries, where a tactic they like to use is in the budget, they always put funding for rape kits down in Springfield. Why do they do that? So that everyone who votes against the budget now has voted against rape kits for women. And so you're not voting against that. It's a massive, huge document where there's one little line about funding for rape kits, but if you vote against that huge bill, they go up and put mail in your district that says that you voted against funding for rape kits. And who would ever appreciate that stance? Who would ever be in favor of a politician who would vote against vulnerable women who have specific needs and need to be supported, but they just throw those little things in these bills, and then they would blow it out of proportion. And they did that in her favor when she won in 2020, and then they did it against her in 2022, and now she's suing over it. I mean, it's just, the hypocrisy is just dripping from this.
But you know, Colin, the Republicans have been prone to doing the same thing on our end. Don't you recall, Darren Bailey was a secret Democrat,
Right.
a supporter of Joe Biden
Yeah.
because he voted once in a Democratic primary. But we do the same thing. It just doesn't work on our end because,
Well, we do it poorly. I mean,
We do it terribly.
it's really the way we do it. Trying to convince a bunch of Republican primary voters that Darren Bailey is a liberal is a pretty bad way to play that strategy. So it isn't the strategy itself that's failed, it's the way the tactic is played out that's failed. But I think I have no problem with the tactic. I'm not the one out there suing somebody over it. My point is, if you're going to play the game and then you get burned by the game, don't go crying to the courts. That's my point.
I just think,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just think it's such a bad look. Like, obviously, I've never run for office before, so I don't understand what it's like to be in that arena. But if you know what you're getting into, and it just looks incredibly bitter, and I just don't think it's a great look. Take it on the chin. Be better for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, we are low on time. One more topic. I know Chris always gets shafted, so we're going to let him cover one of his topics here, which is Paul Vallas, former candidate for mayor in Chicago, almost won. He has now joined the Illinois Policy Institute, and a lot of people are wondering what the heck is up with that. So, Chris, what's going on there?
In an election season of unforced errors after unforced errors coming out of Paul Vallas and much of his team, this might honestly take the cake. Paul Vallas, after months of telling the voters of Chicago that, no, I am not a Republican, I am a lifelong Democrat, which, he is, him making a lateral transition from running for mayor to now consulting the Illinois Policy Institute.
Which, for those who don't know, is a more fiscally aligned conservative policy shop.
Certainly. They've been behind a lot of very conservative things, especially under the Rauner days. They were the ones who, I believe they're the ones who made the documentary about Madigan and all that stuff. So certainly
they're one of the biggest opponents of the Chicago's Teachers Union, which is a fun fight to watch, I'm not going to lie.
But after all of those months of, Vallas telling everybody, I'm not a Republican, and all the unforced errors of being on Jeannie Ives' podcast and all that stuff, it's just sad to see, especially when some of his field workers still haven't gotten paid.
Yeah.
So I hope some of Paul Vallas' consulting money that he's getting from the Illinois Policy Institute is going to paying some of his field staffers.
Yeah, well, Chris is always going to be in the side of making sure the staff gets paid, which I love. But I'm sure he's going to be in the crosshairs. We've got one of Paul Vallas' staffers who is here. So Chris giving some shade on the Vallas campaign. He's probably going to hear it in a couple minutes from the former Vallas staffer. So he'll be ready for that.
He should have won the race.
Chris, I just have a quick question for you. What do you think the reasoning is behind Vallas taking a position like that? Because, like you said, it just from the campaign to now, it just seems like it just seems so tone deaf.
I pray it's because Vallas has no intention of running for anything ever again. So now he's actually going to utilize his experience. Because here's the thing: all of this conjecturing and him going on Jeannie Ives' podcast and Awake Illinois and all this stuff. This was a great thing if he had no intention of running for public office ever again. Because it's nice. You have a former Democrat, somebody high up in the party who had been able to explain, the Democratic Party's wrong and blah, 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 blah. That's great. Problem was he was running for mayor of Chicago against, the socialist Brandon Johnson. Crime is out of control, guys. We really can't afford these unforced errors. So now I think he's kind of coming to who he really is in politics, and he's going to go with IPI. He was somebody who's probably more aligned with, especially on the teachers union stuff. I hope that's all his, is he's just going there for the teachers union stuff. But it's sad to see after a campaign with so much potential, a chance to win, and you spent $30 million on losing. How did you do this? And people still haven't gotten paid.
Well, poor Chris still hasn't had a good night's sleep since April, but we'll get him there. All right, we are low on time. This is just like I mentioned before, Jimmy Kimmel, who would always make fun of Matt Damon and say, oh, we ran out of time, Matt Damon can't make it on the show. I always do this to Chris. I'm sorry, Chris has a whole Chicago update he wants to share, but we're out of time. So for the fourth week in a row, Chris has to wait yet another week. We'll get there. Also, next week, you don't want to miss it, because there was a juicy topic we weren't able to get to, which is really important to right-of-center politics in the state, which is that there are huge problems amongst Hispanic leadership and the Democratic Party leadership in Pritzker over health care for undocumented, and there's a big fight brewing right now that you're seeing a lot of the news, so you don't want to miss next week, because that's going to be a big political topic, but we will cover that next week. In the meantime, Keith is our special guest. Any final thoughts for us, for our listeners or watchers? You want to pimp Lake County one final time, or what do you want to do?
Here's what I hope everyone considers in this election, regardless of what's going on at the national level or what they believe the political circus is, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Start listening to the candidates and give the Lake County Republicans a chance. Give us another look. I refuse to be defined, and I think the party's along with us, by the way the Democrats are defining us, by the way our opponents in the media are defining us. Take a look at how we talk about ourselves and what we are looking to bring to communities, and we're looking to reinvigorate the economics and safety and all of these core principles back into our local communities where we really believe control should be. that's what I hope people give us another look at, and I hope it translates to our candidates.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to close. On behalf of Keith Brin, thank you very much for being here. Our political team members who were here, Chris, Abby, Matt, I'm Colin Corbett. Thank you for watching this episode of The Smoke-Filled Room. Please make sure you like this, you subscribe to it. You know what, I never give him credit, but thanks to Lane Davis, our producer, who works really hard behind the scenes, and we like to give him a lot of crap for it. But we wouldn't be here without him, so thank you to Lane as well. Again, this has been The Smoke-Filled Room. We'll catch you next week.